On a previous video, I was telling you about a friend of mine who was thinking about driving his Tesla up US 27 to get to like Winter Haven, near where Legoland is. From South Florida, getting there is a little bit tricky. You can drive up US 27 the whole way, or you can drive up the turnpike and come across I-4 and then come down, or you can come part of the way up, cut across the state, and make your way over. Your choice. Any way you look at it, it's a longish drive because you have to go on some city streets and so forth, and some not highways part of the way. But you can take a nice leisurely drive as you're going up there. So my friend decided he was going to go up for Thanksgiving, and wound up having to go through Port St. Lucie to get a Supercharge, and then cut across the state to get to where he wanted to go. And then he wound up driving up to Celebration from there, the same charging spot that I had stopped at to top off before he started to head home. And then on the way home, he took the turnpike and actually wound up on the turnpike, stopping at the same station I was at there as well. So the problem was, as he explained it to me, that it was a little bit tricky to go that route because you had to really plan for your trip to make sure that you were aware of where the routes were, what was happening, to make sure that you had the opportunity to get charged. He didn't have any range anxiety, but he was concerned about how the charging was going to work, given the distances and how far he had to go and the fact that he had to cut across the state. So it was kind of interesting. He also gave me a second warning, and this one I thought was kind of interesting. It was that traveling on a holiday weekend, because he went over Thanksgiving, is not recommended. And the reason for that is, on the way home, as he came through the Fort Drum Service Plaza where he did some supercharging, he had to wait about 30 minutes because all 6 stalls were in use. Well, technically speaking, only 5 of them were in use. The 6th one was not working. So he was out there waiting for a stall to be available so he could charge, so he had to wait for someone else to finish. And he said there were 3 or 4 cars waiting, and he was playing traffic cop as he was just helping people get to the stalls and know who was next and kind of helping out a little bit, which is kind of an interesting story. And it leads me around to reading this story about this Supercharger that was in California, where they have 40 stalls, and all 40 of them were in use during the holiday weekend, and people had to wait a very long time to be able to charge, which is an interesting problem to have. And actually, on the bright side, it's kind of a good problem that Tesla has, that the cars are so popular that they have to actually wait to supercharge on a holiday. Now, it's not a problem you want to have long term, certainly, because it's really going to hurt your ability to sell cars if people can't get from point A to point B easily. But it's kind of interesting when you stop and think about it, that this is what's happening with these superchargers. More people are on the road, more people are using it. So it comes back to my conversation earlier about the fact that there's more places to charge and more things to do with your car than there ever have been before, because now you've got plenty of opportunities to charge up, to go different places and make your charge happen. So I just found that kind of interesting, and I wanted to share that. He also shared with me one other story. I don't have autopilot on my car, as you know, but he did purchase autopilot. And he was driving home, and by the time they had charged up and they were on their way back, it was, early evening. It was dark out, and they're driving back. And he's driving along, and all of a sudden, he has autopilot on, and he starts to nap a little bit. He notices himself falling asleep, and then suddenly, he wakes up, and he's like, wait, it's been like, a minute, 30 seconds, whatever it's been. It felt like forever. And the car was driving itself, and his hands were still on the wheel, but he was no longer in control of it. And he was really intimidated by that, and he's like, okay, note to self, next time, don't get in that situation. But it was an interesting thing that happened to him, and it occurred to me that this is a common kind of thing. He goes, I'm glad there weren't any cameras around to catch me asleep at the wheel while we were driving, but it's an interesting problem. And I can see more of that happening. It is an easy car to drive. I find it, even without the autopilot, it's a really easy car to drive. I have an easy time driving it. I never really feel like I'm struggling at all with this car, and it's a really comfortable car to drive. Now, not having the autopilot means I have to pay a little more attention, just as I would in a traditional car, but an interesting thought anyway. So that's it. I just wanted to share sort of that story, the idea that, there's more supercharging available than there ever has been, but yet with the number of cars that are on the road, it's becoming a sort of a problem, especially on holidays, that you may not be able to charge your car up. And I find that kind of fascinating. You may have to wait a little bit. So I just found that interesting. Like I said, when I came back from Orlando, I had to wait for, I had to wait for a couple of minutes before I started charging, but the cars behind me, I got the last stall. But the cars behind me certainly had to wait for a little bit. So I found that really interesting. And they do charge quickly, but it leads me around to this thought about what's going to happen with the next generation of chargers. Right now I have to, you know, open up the charge port and then I put in the charger. What happens when you can charge up somewhat wirelessly? And you could just pull over a plate basically and you can charge up, and it takes less time to charge that way than it would by plugging it in. Or what happens when you can replace a battery pack out and just keep going on your way, and it takes less time than anything else. And what happens when they increase the range on these cars, which will continue to happen. Mine only goes 215 miles or so, but there are certainly some out there that can go a lot farther. So, you know, how does this work? You know, where do we go with this? And I just find the whole thing really interesting, and stay tuned because it's really going to be an interesting story. And by the way, unrelated to that, I noticed that my car really does need a wash. So I'm going to have to do another video about actually washing my car. And yes, I'm in South Florida, so, you know, it's short sleeve weather and I can actually wash the car outside. So don't be too jealous. It's just the way it is in South Florida. This is why we live here. But, you know, that's the way it goes. So you'll get to see another video of me washing the car, not in the not too distant future.